I arrived at the wedding dressed in a well-tailored suit, not overly extravagant, but sharp enough to command respect. Or so I thought. The moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. Conversations halted for a brief second, replaced by the unmistakable whispers of judgment. My wife's family had always treated me like an outsider, but today, they weren't even trying to hide it. The venue was grand. White silk drapes cascading from the ceiling, chandeliers glistening like stars, and floral arrangements so excessive they looked like a royal garden had exploded in the middle of the hall. Every detail screamed luxury. Every glance in my direction screamed something else, unwelcome. As I made my way toward my wife, her mother, the infamous mother-in-law from hell, intercepted me. She wasn't just the matriarch of the family. She was the self-proclaimed gatekeeper of status and proper image. And apparently, I didn't fit into the picture. Her face contorted into an exaggerated expression of concern, though I knew better. "Oh dear, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. I forced a polite smile. Of course, wouldn't miss it for the world. She looked me up and down, as if scanning for flaws. Then, with the same condescending tone, she gestured toward the very back row of seats, the kind meant for plus ones that nobody cared about or distant cousins who weren't actually invited but showed up anyway. "Why don't you sit over there? We don't want to ruin the wedding photos." I blinked. The words stung, but not because they were unexpected, because they were so blatantly cruel, so deliberately humiliating. I turned to my wife, half expecting her to defend me. Instead, she let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head like I was some harmless fool. "Mom," she said lightly, "be nice." But it wasn't a defense. It was a dismissal. A pat on the head like I should just accept my place. I should have been used to this by now. My in-laws never hid their distaste for me. I wasn't born into money, didn't have a last name that meant something, didn't spend my life vacationing in countries most people couldn't afford to pronounce. I worked my way up, built something from the ground, not from inheritance. But to them, that wasn't enough. I swallowed my pride and walked to the back, sat where they wanted me to, watched as the real family took center stage. The guests were already posing for pictures, photographers snapping away as my brother-in-law and his bride basked in the limelight. Laughter, champagne toasts, the clinking of expensive silverware. All of it blurred in the background as I stared at my wife. She had once claimed to love me for my ambition, my determination. She used to say that money didn't matter, that we were partners in every way. But as time passed, I saw the shift. The way she enjoyed the comfort of being the one who married down. The way she let her family treat me like a burden instead of her husband. And today, she didn't just let it happen. She laughed. Something inside me clicked into place. I wasn't just going to sit there and let them pretend I was nothing. I reached into my pocket, feeling the smooth surface of my phone. Then, without a word, I stood up and walked outside. They didn't notice. Not yet. But they would. They would never forget this day. I stepped out of the wedding hall and into the cool evening air, letting the tension roll off my shoulders. The laughter, the smug grins, the dismissive glances, they all melted away as I took a deep breath. I wasn't angry. I was focused. It wasn't the first time my wife's family had disrespected me. But today, they had done it in public, in front of hundreds of guests, cameras, and people who would remember every detail. They had humiliated me, thinking I'd sit there, accept it, swallow the insult like I had before. That was their first mistake. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact saved under a single word, execute. A voice picked up immediately. "Is it time?" A smirk formed on my lips. "It's time," I said. The voice chuckled, the kind of laugh that comes from a man who enjoys his work. "Understood. Give me 10 minutes. I ended the call without another word. No explanations were needed. We had prepared for this moment months ago. See, my wife and her family had always assumed I was struggling. They saw my simple, strategic lifestyle and mistook it for lack of wealth. They never asked what I did, where my investments lay, how deep my connections ran. And that was their second mistake. Because while they spent their lives flaunting their old money prestige, I had built something far greater, influence. and in 10 minutes, that influence was about to wreck their perfect little event. I took my time strolling back inside, my pace calm, unhurried. My seat at the back was still waiting for me, the symbolic reminder of where they thought I belonged. I sat, fingers lightly tapping on the armrest, watching the wedding unfold. The groom, my wife's brother, was beaming as he twirled his bride on the dance floor. The band played an elegant melody, the guests sipped their drinks, and the photographers moved seamlessly, capturing every perfect angle. In their minds, this was a flawless wedding. They had no idea what was coming. I glanced at my wife. She was deep in conversation with her sister and a few high society wives, laughing as she sipped from her champagne glass. She had been so comfortable in my silence. She thought I was harmless. That was her third mistake. As the 10-minute mark approached, I leaned back, adjusting my cufflinks, my pulse steady. Then, like clockwork, the first sign appeared. It was subtle at first. The head chef, a middle-aged man in a pristine white uniform, walked over to one of the waiters, whispered something, and casually removed his apron. Then he walked out. A second waiter followed. Then another. And another. The guests hadn't noticed yet. The wedding continued. Glasses clinked, conversations flowed, and the music carried on. But behind the scenes, the staff was vanishing. One by one, the bartenders, servers, decorators, and kitchen staff quietly packed up and left, slipping through the back exit like ghosts in the night. The event, the one my wife's family had spent over a year planning, was unraveling right before their eyes. And no one had a clue. Not yet. But they would. Because I was done being their poor one. I checked my watch. 5 minutes left before the real storm hit. I smirked, swirling the untouched drink in my glass. Enjoy this moment while you can, dear in-laws. You won't like what happens next. I leaned back in my chair, watching the carefully curated event start to unravel at the edges. The room was still lively, filled with the hum of laughter, the occasional burst of applause, and the clinking of expensive champagne glasses. To the untrained eye, everything looked perfect. But to me, I saw the cracks forming beneath the surface. The first sign came in the form of a missing tray of appetizers. At first, no one noticed. The servers had been moving seamlessly through the crowd just moments ago, expertly balancing silver platters stacked with delicate hors d'oeuvres. But now, guests were glancing around, confused, their hands empty. A woman in a form-fitting navy blue dress, one of my mother-in-law's socialite friends, snapped her fingers at a nearby waiter. "Excuse me? We haven't been served in a while." The waiter, a young man with a stiff posture and a darting gaze, didn't respond. Instead, he set his tray down on an empty table, removed his serving towel, and walked straight out of the venue. Gone. The woman frowned, muttering under her breath, but she was too self-absorbed to dwell on it. She turned back to her group, laughing as if nothing had happened. But that was just the beginning. At the bar, a wealthy-looking man in a tailored tuxedo strolled up confidently, nodding toward the bartender. "Another whiskey for me and my friends," he ordered, tapping his glass against the counter. But the bartender, who had been moving swiftly just minutes ago, was completely still. His face was blank, his fingers curled tightly around the edge of the counter. Then, without a word, he untied his apron, tossed it onto the counter, and walked away. The guest waiting for his drink blinked in shock. "What the hell? Where are you going?" No response. The bartender didn't even glance back. The man scoffed, turning toward his friends. "We paid for an open bar, and they're just leaving?" A few other guests started to notice the oddity. The flow of drinks was slowing down, the usual endless pouring of wine and liquor interrupted by long, uncomfortable pauses. But still, the party continued. A table of well-dressed socialites waved down a passing waiter. "Could we get another bottle of champagne?" one of the women asked, tilting her empty flute. The waiter nodded and walked toward the back. They waited and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The waiter never returned. "Where is he?" one of the women muttered, twisting in her chair. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Guests were looking around, noticing that no one was coming to clear their plates. The staff that had once moved in a perfectly synchronized rhythm was thinning out. One by one, the waiters disappeared, slipping toward the exits in quiet resignation. But it wasn't until the music stopped that people truly began to realize something was wrong. Up on stage, the wedding band had been providing elegant background music, soft piano notes, a touch of violin, and the occasional smooth jazz tune. They had just finished a song when, instead of starting another, they put down their instruments. The pianist closed the lid on the grand piano. The violinist tucked her bow under her arm. The drummer adjusted his cufflinks and stood up. And without a word, they all walked off the stage. The sudden silence was deafening. People looked up from their conversations, blinking in confusion. The music had been an ever-present hum, a steady heartbeat to the celebration. Now, nothing. The entire room felt it. The weight of an invisible force pressing down. The sense that something was happening, something no one could quite put their finger on. At the front of the room, my mother-in-law, the self-appointed queen of etiquette and social standing, finally sensed the shift. She had been too busy basking in her own glory, soaking in the compliments, flaunting her jewelry and expensive gown. But now, the atmosphere had changed. She flagged down the wedding coordinator, a tall, thin woman in a fitted black suit and a headset. "Why is the music off?" my mother-in-law demanded. "And where is the champagne service? My guests are waiting." The coordinator, usually a pillar of professionalism, looked visibly shaken. I'll check on it," she stammered before hurrying toward the back. But there was nothing to check, because there was no staff left to check on. Up until this moment, my wife had been completely oblivious. She had been seated at a table with her sister and some of their old university friends, lost in gossip and meaningless conversation. She had barely acknowledged my presence since we arrived. But when the music stopped, when the servers vanished, when the room shifted from celebration to confusion, she finally noticed. She frowned, setting down her drink. "What's going on?" she murmured to her sister. Her sister glanced around, also noticing the eeriness. "I don't know, but I saw some of the staff leaving. I think something's happening." My wife turned in her seat, scanning the room. That's when her eyes met mine. I was already watching her. I lifted my glass slightly, my expression calm, controlled. And in that single moment, I saw it. Recognition. A flicker of realization in her eyes. She knew. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. But she knew. I was behind this. Her lips parted slightly, as if to say something, but no words came out. She looked around again, this time with urgency. Then, for the first time all night, she looked worried. Good. Because this was only the beginning. I checked my watch. 10 minutes had passed. The real storm was just about to begin. Not a comfortable silence, the kind that settles between two lovers at peace. No, this was the unnatural kind. The kind that makes people shift in their seats, adjust their ties, glance around for reassurance that everything is still under control. But it wasn't. And soon, everyone would know it. I remained seated at the back, arms folded, watching the slow realization creep through the wedding like a rising tide. The guests, at first, tried to ignore it. They were the kind of people who thrived on maintaining appearances, who wouldn't admit something was wrong until it slapped them across the face. Well, the slap was coming. At the far end of the hall, near the kitchen doors, 3 waiters exchanged glances. Then, as if on cue, they unfastened their aprons, tossed them onto the nearest table, and walked out. It was slow, calculated, like ghosts disappearing into the night. One of the groomsmen, a broad-shouldered man in an overpriced tuxedo, furrowed his brow. "Hey, where are you guys going?" No response. He turned to grab another waiter, only to find that one was already walking away, too. Then another. Then another. The once graceful, choreographed movement of the staff was falling apart like a house of cards. Across the room, at the bar, the head bartender lifted his hat, tipped it slightly toward my mother-in-law, and walked out without a word. Behind him, the 2 junior bartenders hesitated for only a moment before following. The line of guests waiting for drinks stared at the abandoned bottles and empty bar stools. Someone chuckled nervously. This must be a joke, right? But nobody laughed, because the second wave was already beginning. The first real sign of panic came when my mother-in-law finally lost her composure. She had always been a woman of control, of power, of making sure everything ran exactly the way she wanted. But right now, her control was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her lips tightened into a thin line. She whipped around to find the wedding coordinator, her last line of defense. Fix this. Now. The wedding coordinator, who had built a career out of handling high-maintenance clients, stood frozen. She wasn't reaching for her headset. She wasn't moving to call an extra staff. She was just standing there. Because she already knew. There was nothing left to fix. "Ma'am," she said slowly, almost apologetically. "The staff, they're gone." Mother-in-law's eyes bulged. "Gone," she hissed. "Yes. All of them. All of them." I saw it happen in real time. The moment the realization struck her like a brick to the face. The wedding. The one she had spent over a year planning. The one she had used to flaunt her social status. The one where she had mocked me, belittled me, pushed me to the back like an uninvited guest. It was unraveling right in front of her, and she had no clue why. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were shifting in their seats, frowning, whispering in confusion. Why is the service stopping? Where are the waiters? This is weird. Who runs out of staff in the middle of a wedding? Guests who had been holding empty glasses for too long started looking irritated. The ones who had plates full of half-eaten food now realized there was no one coming to clear them. The ones who had been waiting for a fresh round of champagne were now holding nothing but thin air. A woman in an emerald green gown, her diamond necklace glinting under the dim lights, waved down a passing staff member. "Excuse me, could you tell me what's going on? We've been waiting for service." The staff member, a decorator who had been setting up floral arrangements minutes ago, simply smiled. Then, he took off his name tag, placed it neatly on the table, and walked away. The woman's jaw dropped. Guests were no longer whispering. They were talking loudly. Confusion was turning to frustration, and frustration was turning into full-blown panic. I had been watching my wife the entire time. I had watched the slow, creeping dread settle into her features. Her nails tapped anxiously against the table. She scanned the room, searching for someone. Anyone. To take control. Her mother? Furious and yelling at the coordinator. The venue manager? Nowhere to be found. The waiters? Gone. She turned again and locked eyes with me. This time, there was no mistaking it. She knew. She didn't know how I did it. She didn't know when I did it. But she knew it was me. I didn't say a word. I simply lifted my glass in a slow, deliberate motion, took a sip, and smiled. Her face drained of color. She leaned toward me, voice low but urgent. "What did you do?" I tilted my head slightly. "Me. Don't play games with me. This," she gestured around the collapsing event. "This is you, isn't it?" I let the silence stretch between us. Then, in the calmest voice possible, I said, "Oh, sweetheart. I'm just sitting in the back, like you all wanted." And with that, I set my glass down, leaned back, and watched as everything fell apart. The venue staff exit doors burst open. The last remaining employees, security guards, dishwashers, event organizers, filed out in a perfectly coordinated exodus. Guests stood up, bewildered. The once grand wedding, the symbol of my in-laws' wealth and status, was collapsing before their eyes. A cold chill settled over the room. People were pulling out their phones, making calls, whispering about what the hell was happening. But I already knew. Because this wasn't just a wedding disaster. This was a lesson. And my wife's family? They were about to learn exactly who I was. I checked my watch. Time for the truth. It started slowly, a ripple of confusion rolling through the grand ballroom, subtle at first. A few murmurs. Guests shifting in their seats, craning their necks, glancing around for an explanation. Then, like a glass shattering in slow motion, the event began to fall apart. The first real shock came when a group of guests near the buffet table lifted the lids of the silver serving trays, only to find them empty. Not half full, not poorly stocked, completely empty. One man, someone I recognized as a business associate of my father-in-law, slammed his lid shut, turning to a nearby waiter. "What is this?" he demanded, gesturing at the barren table. The waiter, an older man with neatly combed hair and a practiced smile, didn't answer. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a resignation slip, and placed it carefully on the table. Then he walked away. A woman in a red silk gown, standing nearby, let out a nervous laugh. "This has to be a joke, right?" she said. "Where's the food?" No answer. Because the kitchen staff was gone. The people in charge of preparing the main courses, serving the fancy hors d'oeuvres, and ensuring the champagne glasses never emptied, they had all walked out. And now, there was nothing left to serve. Over at the bar, things weren't any better. A line had formed, guests expecting their drinks, growing impatient. A young woman in a diamond-studded gown tapped her fingers against the counter. "Hello? Can I get some champagne here?" The bartender, the last one remaining, polished the rim of a glass, set it down carefully, and exhaled. Then, with an infuriatingly calm expression, he lifted his hands and said, "Sorry, folks, we're closed." Gasps. Stunned silence. Then, "What? Closed? Are you insane? This is a wedding." The bartender shrugged, tossing his towel onto the counter. "Not my problem anymore." And with that, he turned on his heel and left. The guests stood there, blinking, unsure if this was some elaborate prank. But it wasn't, because now, the truth was sinking in. The wedding was falling apart, and there was no one left to fix it. At first, they tried to downplay it. "It's just a miscommunication," someone said. "They probably just had a shift change," another guest offered, voice uneasy. But then, the lights dimmed. Not in a romantic, ambient way. No, the sound system crackled, the chandeliers flickered, and suddenly, all of the decorative spotlights that had been highlighting the bride and groom, they shut off. The band was already gone. The music wasn't coming back. Now, the entire event looked dull, lacking, lifeless. Without the perfect lighting, without the trained staff running the show behind the scenes, it was no longer an extravagant wedding. It was just a badly planned event falling apart. And that's when the first wave of exits began. Guests who had only come for status reasons, those who had no real connection to the bride or groom, took this as their cue to leave. I watched, completely still, as people started slipping toward the exits. Not running, not making a scene, just quietly walking out. As if they didn't want to be associated with a failing event. As if they didn't want to be seen at a wedding that was, in real time, becoming a disaster. By now, my mother-in-law was livid. Her carefully crafted mask of elegance was cracking. She stormed toward the wedding coordinator, who, by now, was shaking. "Where is the staff?" The coordinator stammered, struggling to form an answer. I don't know, ma'am. They left. Every single one of them." Mother-in-law's eyes widened. "Then call someone. Get them back." The coordinator swallowed hard, gripping her clipboard so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "We can't." "What do you mean you can't?" The woman exhaled shakily, avoiding her gaze. "Because, ma'am, they don't work for us." My mother-in-law froze. She was watching. I could feel it. My wife, who had spent the last hour ignoring me, dismissing me, pretending I didn't exist, was now staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Her lips parted, her breath shallow. Because now, she was putting the pieces together. The perfectly timed staff walkout, the disappearance of the music, the drinks, the food, the coordinated destruction of her family's most important event. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a simple mistake. It was me. Her hands trembled slightly as she leaned toward me. You did this." I didn't blink, didn't move. I just let the weight of her words settle into the air between us. Then, finally, I spoke. "What makes you think that?" Her jaw tightened. Asterisk, "because I know you. And this," she gestured around wildly, "this is too perfect. It's planned. It's you." I tilted my head, pretending to consider. "Maybe." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Why?" she whispered. I leaned in, voice calm, steady. "Because you let them disrespect me. Over and over again. Because they called me the poor one. And you laughed. Because you made me an outsider at my own family's event. Her breath hitched. But this is ruining my brother's wedding. No, sweetheart. I smiled, slow and deliberate. I'm ruining your mother's wedding. Her eyes widened. And right on cue, the venue manager walked in. Her face was grim, her hands clasped together as she approached my mother-in-law. Ma'am, I regret to inform you that, due to a breach of contract, this event is now being shut down. Gasps. Whispers. Mother-in-law staggered back, stunned into silence. The wedding was over. And I just watched it burn. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, all of it was gone. In its place, stunned faces, pale expressions, panic bubbling beneath the surface. And at the center of it all, standing rigid with her perfectly manicured hands shaking at her sides, was my mother-in-law. I had never seen her like this before. Not during the years she had mocked me at family gatherings. Not when she called me the poor one behind my back. Not even when she practically spat at my existence at this very wedding. No, this was different. Because for the first time in her entire life, she was powerless. The venue manager stood firm, her voice even and professional despite the chaos unraveling around her. Ma'am, I regret to inform you that due to a breach of contract, this event is now being shut down. The words sliced through the air like a blade. Gasps. Murmurs. Guests turned to each other, whispering, gripping their phones, texting frantically. Shut down? How? My mother-in-law blinked. Once. Twice. Then, slowly, her face twisted in fury. What? She shrieked, her voice shrill enough to make heads snap toward her. What are you talking about? The manager stood her ground. Your contract explicitly states that any mistreatment of event staff, verbal, physical, or otherwise, results in an immediate cancellation of service. The multiple complaints filed today by our workers have left us with no choice. I watched as the words sank in. My mother-in-law, the woman who had spent years stepping on people like they were beneath her, was now at the mercy of the very workers she disrespected. Irony was a beautiful thing. This is unbelievable, someone muttered. We came all this way for a wedding, and now there's nothing? This is humiliating. The whispers grew louder, harsher, more unforgiving. Because it wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about reputation. These weren't just any guests. These were socialites, businessmen, women who thrived on status, and now they were standing in the middle of a collapsing event, trapped in the fallout. No food, no drinks, no music, just a mess of abandoned tables, spilled champagne, and the looming shame of being present at a wedding that had just imploded. People were already leaving. Not in an orderly, polite way. No, they were slipping out, one by one. Some in pairs, some in groups, each trying to avoid the embarrassment of being part of this disaster. And that's when my mother-in-law's panic turned into something else. Desperation. She spun toward my wife, her voice sharp. Do something. My wife, who had been staring blankly into space, flinched. Mom, call someone. Fix this. I don't know what to do. That was the wrong answer. Mother-in-law turned toward my father-in-law, her last hope. Fix it. But the man just shook his head in quiet defeat. That's when she knew. It was over. The wedding was over. I had been watching her closely, watching as her face morphed from confusion to dread, watching as she pieced together everything. She finally turned to me, her hands trembling. You did this. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the emptying hall like thunder. I let a slow smile creep across my face. I told you. Her throat bobbed. Told me what? I leaned in, voice steady. That disrespect has consequences. She sucked in a sharp breath. But this, she gestured at the ruined event, the fleeing guests, her devastated family. This is fair, I finished for her. Her eyes widened. You humiliated me, repeatedly. You let your family treat me like garbage. And tonight? I exhaled, shaking my head. Tonight, you laughed while they insulted me. She was breathing hard now. I didn't mean what? I interrupted, tilting my head. Didn't mean for me to hear it? Didn't mean for me to finally do something about it? Tears welled up in her eyes. But I didn't care, because I had spent years swallowing my pride, watching them mock me, treating me like an accessory instead of a man. Tonight, they learned who I really was. I stood up, slowly, casually. Then, in a clear, steady voice, I said, "For those of you who don't know, allow me to introduce myself properly." Some guests froze mid-step, turning to look. Mother-in-law's face twisted. My wife stared, unmoving. "I'm not the poor one, as you so fondly call me. I am the sole owner of the event staffing company that provided everything for this wedding: catering, bartenders, decorators, planners. Every single person who just walked out." I smiled, stretching my arms out. "They work for me." Gasps rippled through the remaining guests. My mother-in-law actually staggered. My wife? Silent. I took a step forward. "You see, while you all spent years laughing at me, underestimating me, assuming I was beneath you, I was building something." I turned to face the bride and groom. "And tonight?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "Well, you just had the privilege of witnessing exactly what I'm capable of." The bride let out a strangled sob. The groom? A mixture of rage and horror. Mother-in-law? Completely frozen. I adjusted my cufflinks, glanced at my watch, and sighed dramatically. "I think I've seen enough." Then, turning to my wife, I said the final words that would haunt her forever. "Enjoy the rest of your night, darling." "Oh, wait." I smirked. "There's nothing left to enjoy." And with that, I turned and walked out. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. The moment I turned my back, I could feel the weight of their stares, the tension pressing down like a storm ready to break. The sound of my footsteps against the marble floor echoed through the hall, a stark contrast to the growing panic behind me. Then it happened. Like a dam finally bursting, the silence broke into a wave of chaos. "What do you mean he owns the staff?" My mother-in-law's voice pierced the air, sharp and panicked. It was as if she had just woken up from a dream. Except this wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare. Her nightmare. I didn't stop walking, but I slowed my pace, just enough to hear everything unravel behind me. "He can't just do this. Get them back," she screeched, her heels clicking against the floor as she spun in circles, looking for someone. Anyone. To fix this. There was no one left. What the F just happened? The groom's voice boomed through the hall, his patience finally cracking. His wedding was ruined. No food, no drinks, no music, no staff, and worst of all, no prestige. The image of his perfect high society wedding was in flames, burning to ashes right in front of him, and he knew exactly who was responsible. "You." I didn't even flinch. I could hear his footsteps thundering toward me, could feel the rage radiating from him like heat off a wildfire. But I didn't turn around. Not yet. Because I wanted him to come to me. I wanted him to reach the point of no return. And he did. Faster than I expected. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, yanking me back violently. I turned, slowly, deliberately. "You think this is funny, huh?" he snarled. His face inches from mine, red with fury. "You think you can just waltz in here and up my wedding?" I didn't speak. I didn't react. I just let him lose control. "You ruined everything," he yelled, his hand still gripping my shoulder, his fingers trembling. I glanced down at his grip, then back up at him. "Take your hand off me." His jaw clenched. He didn't move. He thought he could intimidate me. He thought I was the same quiet, overlooked man they had mocked for years. But he was wrong. I smiled. And then, in a voice just loud enough for him to hear, I said, "This was never your wedding." His nostrils flared. "What the F** does that mean?" I took a step forward, forcing him to take one back. "This wedding," I continued, my voice even, unshaken, deadly calm, "was your mother's showpiece, your family's vanity project, a chance to flaunt their wealth, their connections, their status. But you were just the prop." The veins in his forehead bulged. He raised his fist. That was his final mistake. Because the moment he did, security appeared. Not the venue security. Mine. 2 men in black suits materialized from the edges of the room, gripping his arms before he could even swing. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," someone shouted. The groom struggled, but it was useless. He wasn't the only one who had power in this room, and I had just proven it. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "You want to hit me? Go ahead. Let's see how well a broken nose looks in your wedding photos." "Oh wait," I smirked. "There won't be any photos, will there?" His body tensed. Then, as if someone had ripped the air out of his lungs, he slumped. Defeated. Broken. The security let him go, and he stumbled back. And I turned back toward the door, adjusting my cufflinks like nothing had happened. Wait. This voice was different. Not my mother-in-law's fury. Not the groom's rage. Desperation. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. Not yet. "Please," my wife's voice trembled. "Please don't walk away." Slowly, I turned my head just enough to meet her eyes. She looked wrecked. Her makeup, once perfect, was smudged at the corners, her lipstick fading. Her hands clutched the fabric of her dress like she was trying to hold herself together. "We can fix this," she whispered. Just tell me how." For the first time all night, I felt something close to pity. Not for her family, not for the wedding, but for her. Because she was the only one in this entire mess who actually thought I could be reasoned with. "There's nothing to fix," I said. She took a shaky step forward. "I didn't know they were going to say those things to you. I didn't think." I cut her off. "No, you didn't think." She flinched. "You didn't think when you let them treat me like garbage. You didn't think when you laughed along. You didn't think when you let them push me to the back like I didn't belong." Her breathing was uneven now. I didn't want to cause a scene. I let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Well, sweetheart, congratulations." I gestured around the wreckage of the wedding. "You got your scene." Tears spilled down her cheeks. I took a deep breath, exhaling as I gave her one last, long look. "You chose them over me." Her face crumpled. "And now?" I shrugged. "You get to live with that choice." She reached for me, but I had nothing left to give. I turned my back, and this time, I didn't stop. I walked out of the wedding, out of her family's life, out of that chapter of my existence forever. And as I stepped into the cool night air, I finally smiled, because for the first time in years, I was free. I didn't turn back. Not once. Not when I heard my wife choke back a sob. Not when her heels clicked frantically against the marble floor as she ran after me. Not even when her voice, trembling, raw, desperate, called my name. I kept walking, because she had already made her choice. And now, she had to live with it. Wait. I heard her stumble behind me, her breath ragged, uneven. "Please, just stop for a second." I reached the entrance of the venue. The grand double doors stood open, revealing the dark, empty parking lot outside. The air was crisp, cool, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt light. I stepped forward. Then, she grabbed my arm. I stopped, not because I wanted to, but because this was the last time I would ever let her touch me. Slowly, I turned. She was a mess. Her once flawless makeup smeared across her cheeks. Her lips trembling, raw from biting down on them. Her eyes, wide, frantic, overflowing with something she should have felt long before this moment. Regret. "You can't just leave like this," she whispered. I lifted a brow. "Can't I?" Her grip on my arm tightened. "We can fix this." I let out a slow, deep breath. Then, I met her eyes, cold, unreadable. "We." She nodded too quickly, as if the speed of it could somehow convince me. "Yes. I should have stopped them. I should have defended you. I know that now, but we can move past this. I can talk to my mom, to my brother, to everyone. I cut her off with a single step closer. "You still don't get it, do you?" She froze. "This isn't about them." Her brows knitted together. "What?" "This isn't about your mother, or your brother, or your family." I tilted my head. "This is about you." Her lips parted. but no words came out. "You let this happen," I said, voice eerily calm. "You let them treat me like garbage for years. You let them humiliate me tonight. You let them mock me, push me aside, make me feel like an outsider at my own family event." She shook her head wildly. "I didn't mean..." "Stop." She did. "You keep saying you didn't mean for it to happen," I said, my voice dipping lower. "But you never stopped it. You never stood up for me. And when they laughed at me tonight, you laughed with them." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I was caught up in everything. I let them get in my head. But it doesn't mean I don't love you." I smiled. Not because I believed her. Because I didn't. "Love?" I repeated, letting the word linger between us. She nodded frantically. "Yes. I love you. You know that." My smile faded. "No, you don't." Her entire body stilled. "You love what I did for you." Her breath hitched. "You love the comfort I provided. The security. The convenience." I leaned in just slightly, my voice like ice. "But you never loved me." Her hands flew to my chest, gripping my suit. "That's not true." "Then why was it so easy for you to watch me be disrespected?" She flinched. "Why did you sit there while your mother treated me like I was nothing?" Her fingers curled into the fabric of my jacket, shaking. Why did you only care when you realized I had the power to take everything away?" Her lips quivered. And in that moment, she knew. She knew I was right. Because love? Love is respect. Love is loyalty. Love is standing by someone even when it's inconvenient. She had never done any of those things. Not once. And now, she was watching me slip through her fingers. "Forever. Please." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'll do anything. Just don't walk away from me." I studied her. The desperation in her eyes. The silent plea that screamed, "I don't want to lose you." But she already had. She just hadn't accepted it yet. "You know," I murmured, genuine amusement slipping into my tone. "It's funny." She sniffled, blinking at me. "What?" "Your mother told me to sit in the back because she didn't want me in the wedding photos." Her face contorted with shame. I know. That was awful. But we can, now?" I chuckled softly. "There won't be any wedding photos." The breath left her lungs in a shaky exhale. "Don't do this," she whispered. "Don't just leave me." I stepped back. Her hands fell away from my suit, hanging limply at her sides. "I already did." She let out a broken sob. "And I?" I turned my back, for the last time. I stepped outside. The cool air hit my face, washing away the stench of desperation and fake wealth that had clung to that ballroom. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, and then I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I was free. Free from her family. Free from the mockery. Free from a woman who never truly saw me. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a specific number. Then, I dialed. The voice on the other end answered instantly. "Is it done?" I glanced back one last time. The ballroom doors were still open, giving me a perfect view of the wreckage. The scattered guests. The abandoned tables. The groom slumped in a chair, head in his hands. And my wife? Standing alone, crying. I exhaled. "Yeah," I said, turning away for good. "It's done." Click. I walked to my car, never looking back. The engine of my car purred softly as I pulled out of the venue's parking lot, the glow of the grand ballroom fading into the rearview mirror. I didn't speed. I didn't rush. I drove slowly, deliberately, savoring every second of my departure, because I knew that behind me, inside that crumbling wedding hall, the world of my wife and her family was imploding, and they had no one to blame but themselves. My phone buzzed. I didn't check it immediately. I knew exactly who it was. By the time I reached the main road, the notifications were coming relentlessly. I glanced at my screen. 37 missed calls. 15 new messages. "Wife, baby, please pick up." "Wife, I'm sorry, just come back so we can talk." "Wife, please, don't leave like this. I love you." "Mother-in-law, how dare you? You've ruined everything." "Brother-in-law, the groom, you're a sick F***. You just destroyed my wedding. Hope it was worth it." Asterisk father-in-law. Call me. Let's talk like men. I smirked. Men. Funny how they only wanted to talk like men when the power had shifted out of their hands. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and kept driving. Tonight wasn't about them anymore. Tonight was about me. I checked into a 5-star hotel. A penthouse suite, top floor, city skyline view. I didn't do it because I needed to prove a point. I did it because I deserved it. For years, I had been disrespected, mocked, treated like an outsider. Tonight, I had flipped the script. The hotel staff greeted me with professional smiles, offering me a complimentary bottle of their finest whiskey. Would you like your bags brought up, sir? I smiled. No bags. Just me tonight. I took the elevator to my suite, stepping into the expansive room bathed in golden city lights. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, and looked out at the world below. And then, for the first time in years, I felt peace. No weight pressing down on my shoulders. No in-laws suffocating me with their judgment. No wife quietly laughing while I was humiliated. Just me. Free. Unburdened. Whole. I raised my glass. To self-respect. I took a slow sip, letting the burn of the whiskey settle deep. And that's when my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't my wife. It was my lawyer. I answered on the second ring. Everything ready? I asked. His voice was crisp, professional. The papers are finalized. Divorce is straightforward. No joint assets. You're walking away clean. I exhaled. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally lifting. Send them over. Already in your email. All you have to do is sign. I nodded, swirling the last of my whiskey in my glass. And the house? Legally, she can stay for now. But it's in your name. You can sell it whenever you want. I smirked. Good. Put it on the market. High price. No negotiations. There was a pause. You sure? She's still living there? Not my problem. He let out a short chuckle. Understood. I'll handle it. Click. And just like that, it was done. It was past midnight when my phone rang again. I let it ring. I let it go to voicemail. And then, I played the message. Her voice came through, shaky, broken. I don't know what to say. I don't even know where to start. A deep inhale. I messed up. I know that now. I let them treat you like you weren't enough. I let myself believe it too. But I see it now. I see what I did. I see what I lost. I sipped my whiskey, listening, but feeling nothing. Please, if there's even a small part of you that still loves me, just call me back. Just give me a chance to make this right. Silence. Then, her final words. I don't know how to live without you. The message ended. I set my glass down. Then, I deleted the voicemail. Because she was no longer my problem. By morning, my lawyer had already filed the divorce papers. By noon, my house was officially on the market. And by sunset, I was gone. I withdrew from every shared bank account, leaving nothing behind. I cut off every mutual friend. I blocked every number. I erased myself from her world. Because she had made it abundantly clear. She had never truly valued me. So now, she would learn what it meant to live without me. 1 year. That's how long it took for my name to disappear from her circles. No one spoke about me anymore, except in hushed whispers. Whatever happened to him? He just vanished. I heard he sold his house and moved overseas. I heard he built an empire somewhere else. The rumors never stopped. But she knew the truth. She knew exactly what happened. Because one day, exactly 1 year after that disastrous wedding, she saw me again, at a high-end restaurant, sitting at a private table, with a beautiful woman across from me, laughing. I didn't see my ex-wife at first, but she saw me. And for a moment, just a moment, our eyes met. Her face fell, because in that moment, she saw what she had thrown away. Not a poor man, not an unworthy husband, but a man who had rebuilt his life, without her. I lifted my glass in a silent toast. Then, I looked away, because she was nothing more than a memory now. And me? I was finally living. I woke up early that morning, the kind of early where the sky's still gray and the birds haven't figured out it's time to sing yet. My name's Conrad Hale, and for 25 years, I've been the guy who keeps everything running smooth in this house without anyone really noticing. Today was different, though. It was my daughter Clarissa's wedding day, and I wanted it to be perfect for her. I stood there in our little kitchen, the one with the chipped yellow paint and the fridge that hums too loud, folding napkins into those fancy shapes I'd seen on some TV show years back. I'd practiced for weeks, getting the corners just right, because I figured it'd be my quiet way of showing her I cared. Eloise, my wife, and Clarissa were off at the salon, getting their hair twisted into curls and sipping champagne with Eloise's sisters, giggling like I didn't exist. I didn't mind too much. I'd gotten used to being the background guy, the one who fixes the leaky sink or mows the lawn while they plan their big moments. Love, I'd learned, was about doing the work nobody else wanted to do. The napkins looked good, stacked neat on the counter, and I smiled to myself, thinking how Clarissa might notice them later and know her old man had been part of her day. I brewed some coffee, black and strong, and sipped it slow, watching the clock tick toward the time I'd need to put on my suit. It wasn't new, just a gray one I'd worn to a cousin's funeral a few years back, but it still fit okay. I ironed it myself the night before, making sure the creases were sharp. Eloise had laughed when I told her I wasn't renting a tuxedo, said I'd look out of place next to all the fancy guests, but I didn't care. This was about Clarissa, not me. I thought about her as a kid, how she'd run around the backyard with her pigtails bouncing, calling me daddy, while I pushed her on the swing I'd built from scrap wood. She was 24 now, all grown up and marrying some guy named Trevor who worked in finance and had a handshake that felt like a wet fish. I didn't know him well, but she loved him, and that was enough. I finished the coffee, rinsed the mug, and started loading the car with the stuff they'd asked me to bring. Extra chairs, a box of candles, those napkins. The house felt empty without them, just me and the sound of my own footsteps on the creaky floor. I caught my reflection in the hall mirror, gray hair thinning at the top, lines around my eyes deeper than they used to be, and wondered if anyone would even see me today. But I shook it off. This was Clarissa's moment, and I'd spent my life making sure she had moments like this. I'd worked double shifts at the warehouse, saved every penny I could, even when Eloise spent it on dresses or trips with her friends. I never complained. It was for the family, for the life we'd built. I grabbed my keys and headed out, the morning air cool against my face. The drive to the Rosebridge estate was long, and I kept the radio off, just thinking about how proud I was of Clarissa. She'd gone to college, gotten a good job, and now she was starting her own family. I'd done my part, hadn't I? I pulled up to the venue, a big stone building with ivy crawling up the walls, and started unloading. Some guy in a black vest, probably staff, nodded at me like I was one of them, and I guess in a way I was. I carried the chairs inside, set the napkins on a table near the back, and stood there for a minute, taking it all in. The place was beautiful, all white flowers and shiny floors, and I felt a little swell in my chest. Today was going to be worth it. I'd see my girl happy, and that'd be enough. I adjusted my tie, took a deep breath, and told myself it was time to blend into the crowd like always. Just another day of being the guy who makes it all work. The Rosebridge estate looked like something out of a magazine when I stepped inside for the ceremony. My name's Conrad Hale, and I'm not the kind of guy who belongs in places like this. Big chandeliers dripping with crystals, white orchids hanging everywhere, and a carpet so soft I felt bad walking on it in my old shoes. Clarissa's wedding was happening here, and I'd driven up early, still smelling like the coffee I'd had while folding those napkins back home. The place was buzzing already, guests pulling up in shiny black limousines, women in dresses that shimmered, men in suits that probably cost more than my car. I adjusted my gray jacket, the one Eloise had smirked at, and tried to find my spot. I wasn't in the wedding party, see. Nobody asked me to walk Clarissa down the aisle. Eloise had decided her brother Alden would do it instead, said he'd look better in the pictures with his broad shoulders and that fake tan he's so proud of. I didn't argue. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with Eloise was like yelling at the wind, pointless and tiring. So I swallowed it down, that little sting in my chest, and found my seat near the back, in the last row next to the wall. They'd stuck me with her cousin Maynard, a guy with 3 teeth left and a voice that carried like a foghorn. He was already talking before I even sat down, going on about how lawn fertilizer was the secret to a good life. I nodded, pretending to listen, while I watched the room fill up. The seats closer to the front were for the important people, Eloise, Trevor's parents, some of Clarissa's college friends who'd flown in from places I'd never been. Me, I was fine back here. I could see everything, and nobody'd notice if my tie was a little crooked. The music started, soft at first, then swelling into something grand, and everyone stood up. I got to my feet too, brushing off Maynard's hand when he tried to pull me down to keep talking. And then there she was, Clarissa, my little girl, gliding down the aisle like she'd been born to do it. Her dress was white and long, trailing behind her, and her hair was all pinned up with flowers. Alden had her arm, grinning like he'd won a prize, and I couldn't help but feel a twist in my gut. That should have been me, I thought for a second, but I pushed it away. She looked happy, and that's what mattered. I'd spent years making sure she had that smile, working late so she could have ballet shoes, driving her to school when the bus broke down, sitting through her piano recitals even when I was dead tired. Alden might have gotten the walk, but I'd gotten her this far. The crowd clapped as she reached Trevor, this tall kid with slick back hair and a suit that fit him perfect. He took her hand, and they turned to face the minister. I stayed standing a little longer than I should have, just watching her, until Maynard tugged at my sleeve and muttered something about sitting already. I dropped into my chair, the wood creaking under me, and folded my hands in my lap. The ceremony went on, vows, rings, all that stuff, and I kept my eyes on Clarissa the whole time. She didn't look my way, not once, but I didn't expect her to. She was in her world now, and I was just a shadow in it. Maynard leaned over halfway through, his breath smelling like onions, and whispered about how the roses out front needed better pruning. I gave him a tight smile and nodded, wishing I'd brought something to fiddle with, my keys, a pen, anything to keep my hands busy. The minister said something about love and forever, and then it was over. Clarissa kissed Trevor, the room cheered, and I clapped too, quiet and steady, my palms stinging a little from the effort. People started moving, heading out to the reception, and I hung back, letting the crowd thin. Maynard shuffled off to find the bathroom, leaving me alone for a minute. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and looked at the spot where Clarissa had just been. She was gone now, off with her new husband, and I felt this strange mix of proud and empty. I'd done my job, hadn't I? Built her a life good enough to get her here? I took a deep breath, the air thick with perfume and flowers, and started walking toward the reception hall. My seat there'd probably be just as far back, I figured, but that was okay. I'd see her from a distance, like always, and that'd be enough. The napkins I'd folded were waiting somewhere in there, and maybe she'd notice them. Maybe she'd think of me for a second. I stepped out into the sunlight, the noise of the crowd washing over me, and told myself today was still her day, not mine. I walked into the reception hall at the Rosebridge estate, my shoes clicking on the polished floor, and felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life. My name's Conrad Hale, and I'm not built for places this fancy, tables draped in white cloth, centerpieces taller than my head, and waiters gliding around with trays of champagne like they were part of some ballet. Clarissa's wedding was in full swing now, and I was just trying to find my place in it. I'd spent the morning folding napkins for this, hauling chairs, making sure everything was ready, but nobody'd said a word about that. I didn't expect them to. I checked the seating chart near the door. My name was scribbled in small print, table 12, tucked by the emergency exit like an afterthought. Eloise was up front at the main table, sitting with Trevor's parents, her laugh cutting through the hum of the room. She didn't even glance my way. I made my way over, weaving through people I didn't know, their voices loud with stories about vacations and stock markets. Table 12 had a wobbly leg and a view of the kitchen doors swinging open every few seconds, letting out blasts of heat and the clatter of pots. I sat down, my gray suit feeling tighter than it had that morning, and nodded at the guy next to me, an older fellow with a bow tie who smelled like mothballs. He grunted something about the weather and went back to his bread roll. The band started playing, soft jazz that made the air feel heavy, and I watched the room move around me. Clarissa was out there on the dance floor with Trevor, her dress swirling as they spun. She looked like a princess, and for a second, I forgot where I was, just saw my little girl, the one I'd carried on my shoulders when she was 5, giggling as we pretended she was flying. I smiled to myself, sipping the wine they'd poured me. It was good, sharp and cold, better than the stuff I kept at home. The food came out, roast duck with some kind of sauce, potatoes mashed so smooth they didn't even look real. Mine was cold by the time it got to me, but I ate it anyway, cutting slow and careful, keeping my elbows off the table like my mom taught me. Up front, Clarissa stepped to the microphone, her voice bright as she thanked everyone for coming. I leaned forward, waiting, hoping maybe she'd say something about me. "I want to thank my mom," she said, turning to Eloise, "for everything, for planning this, for being my rock, my best friend." The room clapped, Eloise beaming like she'd won an award. Clarissa went on about Trevor's family, her bridesmaids, even the florist. My name didn't come up. Not once. I sat back, the wine glass sweaty in my hand, and took a long drink. It wasn't a surprise, not really. I'd always been the quiet one, the guy who paid the bills and fixed the car and didn't ask for much. But it stung anyway, like a paper cut you don't see coming. I looked over at Eloise. She was laughing again, her head thrown back, her diamond earrings catching the light. She hadn't looked at me all day, not even when I'd carried in those extra chairs she demanded at the last minute. I wondered if she even remembered I was here. The band picked up, and people started dancing again. I stayed put, watching Clarissa twirl with her new husband, her face glowing. She didn't need me out there, I told myself. She had her mom, her friends, this whole big life I'd helped build but wasn't part of. The duck sat heavy in my stomach, and I pushed the plate away, picking at the napkin I'd folded earlier. It was still perfect, sitting there by my glass. I wondered if she'd seen it, if she'd even care. The guy next to me started talking about his sciatica, and I nodded along, half listening, my eyes drifting back to the main table. Eloise was holding court now, telling some story that had Trevor's mom in stitches. I could have walked up there, said something, made myself seen, but what was the point? They'd just smile and turn away again. I finished my wine, the glass empty too fast, and set it down quiet. The night stretched on, speeches and toast piling up, and I kept my seat, my hands folded in my lap. I was here for Clarissa, I reminded myself, even if she didn't know it, even if nobody did. The music got louder, the lights dimmed, and I sat there by the exit, watching my daughter shine in a world that didn't have room for me. It was fine, I thought. I'd made it this far being invisible. One more night wouldn't kill me. The reception hall at Rosebridge Estate was alive with noise, clinking glasses, laughter, the band swinging into some upbeat tune I didn't recognize. My name's Conrad Hale, and I was still sitting at table 12, the one by the emergency exit, nursing a second glass of wine that didn't taste as good as the first. Clarissa was out there, dancing with Trevor, her white dress catching the light every time she moved. I'd been watching her all night, proud in that quiet way I'd gotten used to, even if she hadn't said my name in her speech. I figured that was just how it went. 25 years of being the guy behind the scenes, and you stop expecting the spotlight. But then the MC grabbed the microphone, and everything changed. He was a young guy, all teeth and slick hair, bouncing on his toes like he was about to announce a lottery winner. "All right, folks," he said, his voice booming over the music. "Before we cut the cake, we've got a very special introduction to make. Please welcome the disappointment and housekeeper of the family, Mr. Conrad Hale." The room exploded with laughter. It hit me like a punch, sharp and sudden, right in the chest. Heads turned, eyes landed on me, some curious, some smirking, a few just confused. I felt my face go hot, the wine glass slippery in my hand. Eloise was up at the main table, clapping with this exaggerated glee, her mouth twisted into a grin that didn't reach her eyes. Clarissa, my daughter, my little girl, she just took a sip of her wine and leaned over to Trevor, muttering something that made him chuckle. I sat there, frozen, the laughter echoing in my ears, louder than the band, louder than anything. My hands started shaking, just a little at first, then harder, and I set the glass down before I dropped it. The MC waved at me, like I was supposed to stand up and take a bow or something, but I couldn't move. My throat tightened up, like someone had wrapped a hand around it and squeezed. I looked at Clarissa again, waiting for her to meet my eyes, to see me, and she did, just for a second. "It's just a joke, Dad," she said, loud enough for me to hear over the noise. Lighten up, like it was nothing. Like I hadn't spent my whole life bending over backwards so she could have this day. The room kept laughing, a few people clapping like it was part of the show, and I felt my shoulders start to tremble. Not from anger, not yet, but from the effort of holding it all in. I'd never cried in front of people, not since I was a kid, and I wasn't about to start now. I clenched my jaw, stared down at the table, at the napkin I'd folded so careful that morning, still sitting there perfect and untouched. The guy next to me, the one with the bow tie, nudged me with his elbow. "Good one, huh?" he said, grinning like we were in on it together. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was spinning, replaying the words, disappointment, housekeeper, like they were branded on me now. I'd worked 2 jobs when Clarissa was little, warehouse shifts and odd repairs on the side, so Eloise could stay home and play perfect mom. I'd scrubbed floors, fixed pipes, driven Clarissa to every lesson and game she ever had. All while Eloise told me I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't flashy enough for her. And now this. A joke. A big, public laugh at the guy who'd kept it all together. I looked up again, and Eloise was still clapping, slower now, her eyes darting around like she was waiting for the next part of the script. Clarissa was back to talking with Trevor, her head tilted away from me, like I'd already faded out of the picture. The MC moved on, cracking some line about the cake, and the room shifted focus, the laughter dying down. But it didn't leave me. It sat there, heavy, pressing down on my chest. I pushed my chair back, just an inch, the legs scraping loud against the floor, and nobody noticed. I could have walked out right then, disappeared through that emergency exit, and let them have their party without me. But I didn't. Not yet. I stayed, my hands balled into fists under the table, my breath coming short and fast. I'd taken a lot over the years, Eloise's digs, the way she'd parade me around like a trained dog when it suited her, the way Clarissa had started looking past me once she got older. But this was different. This was public. This was my daughter's wedding, the day I'd poured everything into, and they'd turned me into the punchline. I stared at that napkin, the one I'd made for Clarissa, and felt something shift inside me. Not breaking, not yet, but bending hard. I wasn't sure what I'd do next, but I knew I couldn't just sit there and take it forever. The band played on, the room spun around me, and I waited, quiet, for whatever came next. The laughter from that MC's joke still hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking, as I sat there at table 12 in the Rosebridge Estate reception hall. My name's Conrad Hale, and I'd just been called the disappointment and housekeeper of the family in front of a room full of strangers, my wife and my daughter. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my chest felt tight, like someone had parked a truck on it. Clarissa's words, "It's just a joke, Dad. Lighten up," kept replaying in my head, sharp and careless, cutting deeper every time. Eloise's fake clapping, the way she'd smirked like she'd planned it, burned behind my eyes. I could have walked out right then, left through that emergency exit 5 feet from my chair, and never looked back. But something held me there. Maybe stubbornness, maybe the part of me that still wanted to be seen, really seen, for once. I took a deep breath, the kind that rattles in your throat, and stood up slow, my chair scraping the floor loud enough to make the guy next to me flinch. My legs felt unsteady, but I didn't care. I reached into my coat pocket, my old gray suit jacket, the one Eloise hated, and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying all day. It wasn't much to look at, just plain white with a little crease from being folded, but it was heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have been. "If I could have just 5 minutes," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I thought it would, cutting through the hum of the room. Heads turned again, slower this time, not laughing now, but curious. Eloise froze up at the main table, her wine glass halfway to her mouth, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to figure out what I was up to. Clarissa stopped whispering to Trevor and stared at me, her lips parting just a little, like she wasn't sure whether to stop me or let me go. The MC, that grinning kid with the microphone, tried to laugh it off, waving his hand like I was some drunk uncle making a scene. "Oh, looks like we've got a speech incoming," he said, but I stepped forward, closer to the center of the room, and his voice faltered. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't stumbling. I was steady now, steadier than I'd been in years. The band slowed down, the music fading into a soft hum, and the room went quiet. Really quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. All eyes were on me, not as the joke, not as the guy who carried the chairs or folded the napkins, but as something else. A man with something to say. I held up the envelope, my fingers tied around it, and looked out at them, at the guests in their fancy clothes, at Trevor's parents with their pinched faces, at my family who'd spent years pretending I was invisible. "There's something I'd like to read," I said, my voice carrying clear across the hall. "Something real." The MC shifted on his feet, glancing at Clarissa like he was waiting for her to shut me down, but she didn't move. Nobody did. I could feel the weight of their stares, hundreds of them, pinning me in place, but I didn't back off. I'd spent too long backing off, shrinking down, letting them walk over me because it was easier, because I thought that's what love was, taking it, always taking it. Not tonight. I opened the envelope slow, deliberate, letting the sound of the paper crinkle fill the silence. My heart was pounding, loud enough I was sure they could hear it, but my hands were steady now. I pulled out the first sheet, a single page with black ink and a notary stamp, and held it up so they could see it wasn't some scribbled note or a grocery list. It was official, real, mine. I looked at Clarissa, her eyes wide now, and then at Eloise, her face going pale under all that makeup she'd piled on. "You've had your fun," I said, not loud, but firm, like I was talking just to them. "Now it's my turn." The room stayed quiet, waiting, and I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not anymore, but power. For the first time in years, I wasn't the guy in the back, the one they laughed at or forgot. I was the one they couldn't look away from. I didn't know exactly what I'd say next, not word for word, but I knew it'd be the truth. The real truth, the kind I'd buried under years of silence and sweat and swallowed pride. I lowered the paper just a little, enough to see their faces, and started to speak again, my voice filling the space they tried to take from me. This wasn't about ruining anything. This was about claiming what was mine, not the stuff in the envelope, not the money or the deeds, but me, Conrad Hale, the man they'd forgotten until now. The silence in the Rosebridge Estate reception hall was thick, like the air before a storm, as I stood there holding that envelope. My name's Conrad Hale, and I just told a room full of people, my wife, my daughter, all their fancy guests, that I had something real to say. The MC had backed off, his microphone dangling at his side, and the band had stopped playing altogether. Clarissa's eyes were locked on me, wide and unsure, while Eloise sat rigid at the main table, her hands clenched around her wine glass like she could crush it. I didn't flinch. For once, I wasn't going to shrink away. I opened the envelope wider and pulled out the first paper, a deed with my name on it, and held it up high so they could all see the official stamp, the clean lines of ink. "This," I said, my voice steady and loud enough to reach the back of the room, "is a deed for this venue, Rosebridge Estate. I bought it 5 years ago under my company's name." A ripple went through the crowd, murmurs, gasps, a few people shifting in their seats. I kept going. "Every flower you're smelling, every chandelier you're staring at, every glass of champagne you've been drinking, you're standing in what I built." I let that sit for a second, watching their faces change. Eloise's mouth dropped open, just a little, before she snapped it shut, her eyes darting to the people around her like she was worried they'd believe me. Clarissa leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, staring at me like I'd just grown a second head. I didn't stop. I reached into the envelope again and pulled out another paper, this one thicker, with more pages stapled together. "And here," I said, lifting it up, "is the trust fund Clarissa doesn't even know she's had since she was 12. $10,000 a year, every year, sitting there waiting for her. I set it up when I was working those double shifts at the warehouse, when I'd come home with my hands bleeding from loading crates so she could go to that private school." The room was buzzing now, whispers turning into low voices, people turning to each other, pointing at me. I could feel the heat in my face, the blood rushing in my ears, but I kept my eyes on Clarissa. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I lowered the papers a little, enough to look at her straight on, and said, "You might not have seen me, Clarissa. I wasn't the one in the pictures or the speeches, but I was never absent. I was there, every day, making sure you had what you needed." The words came out raw, rougher than I meant them to, but I didn't care. They were true. I turned to Eloise next, her face red now, her lips pressed into a thin line. "And you," I said, pointing the papers at her. "You acted like I was nothing, like I was just the guy who mopped the floors and paid the bills. But this," I waved my hand around the room, at the glittering lights, the polished tables, the whole damn place. "This doesn't happen without me." The murmurs got louder, and I saw Trevor's parents lean in close, whispering something to each other, their eyebrows shooting up. I didn't give them time to figure it out. I reached back into the envelope, my fingers brushing the last paper, but I didn't pull it out yet. I wanted this part to sink in first. 5 years ago," I said, "I started my own company. Quietly. Didn't tell you, Eloise, because you'd have laughed, said I was dreaming too big for a guy like me. Didn't tell you, Clarissa, because I wanted you to have it one day without you thinking it was some kind of bribe. I bought this place, Rosebridge, piece by piece, fixing it up, turning it into what it is now. You're all here because of me, even if you didn't know it." The room was alive now, people talking over each other, some standing up to get a better look at me. I saw Maynard, that cousin with the bad teeth, grinning like he'd just won a bet. I didn't care about him. I cared about the two women in front of me, my wife and my daughter, who'd spent years looking through me like I was glass. So laugh all you want, I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the noise. Call me the housekeeper, the disappointment, whatever you like. But this, I held up the deed again, then the trust fund papers. This is what I've been doing while you were busy forgetting me. Eloise stood up then, her chair scraping back loud, her face twisted with something between anger and panic. Conrad, sit down, she hissed. But I shook my head. No, I said, simple and firm. I'm done sitting down. Clarissa didn't say anything, just kept staring, her hands trembling a little on the table. I lowered the papers, my chest heaving, and felt the weight of it all, the years, the work, the silence, start to lift, just a little. I wasn't done yet. There was more in that envelope, more they didn't know, but for now, I let them sit with this. I'd given them the wedding, the life, everything, and now they knew it. The Rosebridge Estate reception hall was a mess of noise now, whispers turning into chatter, chairs creaking as people leaned forward, all of them staring at me like I'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. My name's Conrad Hale, and I just dropped 2 bombshells, the deed to this place and Clarissa's trust fund, both mine, both built by me while my family laughed me off as nothing. I stood there, the envelope still in my hand, my breath coming fast but steady, and locked eyes with Clarissa. She was pale, her hands flat on the table, looking at me like I was a stranger who'd walked into her wedding uninvited. Eloise was on her feet, her face red and tight, like she was about to explode, but I didn't give her the chance to cut in. I had more to say, and after 25 years of keeping my mouth shut, I wasn't stopping now. You forgot me in your speech, Clarissa, I said, my voice low but clear, slicing through the hum of the room. You thanked your mom, your friends, even the guy who did the flowers, but not me. I'm the one who worked 2 jobs when you were a kid, warehouse days and fixing cars at night, so you could go to that fancy private school. I drove you to every piano lesson, sat in the cold car waiting for you to finish, packed your lunches with those little notes you used to love. I cleaned the house, mopped the floors, fixed the leaks because your mother wouldn't lift a finger. I turned to Eloise then, her eyes blazing, but I didn't flinch. And you, I said, pointing at her, the papers in my hand shaking just a little, you said I wasn't enough. Not smart enough, not rich enough, not good enough for your big plans. You'd parade me around when it suited you, then shove me in the corner when I didn't fit the picture. But without me, there wouldn't be this life. No school for Clarissa, no vacations for you, no wedding like this. My voice cracked, just once, but I swallowed it down and kept going. I was the foundation, Eloise. Not the housekeeper, not the disappointment, the foundation. The room was dead quiet now. Not even a whisper, just the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of the chandeliers overhead. Clarissa's eyes were wet, but she didn't cry, didn't move, just stared at me like she was trying to piece together who I was. Eloise opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing holding her up. I could see Trevor out of the corner of my eye, shifting in his seat, looking at Clarissa like he wasn't sure what to do. I didn't care about him. This wasn't about him. This was about me and the 2 people I'd given everything for, the ones who'd turned me into a joke an hour ago. I didn't do it for thanks, I said, looking back at Clarissa, softening my voice a little. I didn't need you to say my name in some speech. I did it because you're my daughter, and I wanted you to have everything more than I ever had. But tonight, when that MC called me out, when you laughed, when you told me to lighten up, it hit me. You didn't just forget me. You didn't even see me. My throat tightened, and I had to stop for a second, take a breath, steady myself. The envelope felt heavy in my hand, the last paper still inside, but I wasn't ready for that yet. I wanted them to hear this first, to feel it. I built this place, I said, gesturing around the hall, at the flowers, the lights, the polished floors. I bought it when the bank was about to take it, fixed it up with my own hands, turned it into something people like you could show off. I didn't tell you because I didn't need the credit. I needed you to be happy. But I'm done being invisible. I'm done letting you think I'm nothing. Eloise finally found her voice, sharp and loud. Conrad, you're making a fool of yourself, she snapped, stepping around the table, her heels clicking hard on the floor. This is Clarissa's day, not yours. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I'd married 25 years ago, the one who'd charmed me with her laugh, who'd turned cold when the money got tight, who'd spent years chipping away at me until I barely recognized myself. No, I said, calm but firm. This isn't about her day anymore. This is about the truth. And you don't get to shut me up this time. The crowd was shifting now, some people whispering again, others just watching, their mouths half open. I turned back to Clarissa, my voice dropping low. I love you, kid. Always will. But I'm not just the guy who folds the napkins. I'm your father. And I deserve better than this. My chest ached, not from anger, but from something deeper, something I'd buried for too long. I held the envelope tight, knowing what was left inside, knowing it'd change everything. But for now, I let the words hang there, let them see me, really see me for the first time in years. The air in the Rosebridge Estate reception hall felt electric, charged with the weight of everything I just said. My name's Conrad Hale, and I'd laid it all out. The deed to this place, Clarissa's trust fund, the years I'd spent building their lives while they laughed me off as nothing. I stood there, the envelope still in my hand, my heart pounding but my feet planted firm. Clarissa was staring at me, her eyes wet and wide, like she didn't know what to say. Eloise was on her feet, her face a mix of fury and panic, her voice cutting through the silence a moment ago with that sharp, "You're making a fool of yourself." But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She stepped closer, her heels snapping against the floor, and tried again. "Conrad, this is embarrassing. Sit down and stop ruining Clarissa's wedding." Her words were loud, meant for the room as much as me, and I saw a few heads nod, like they agreed this was my fault. Clarissa muttered something under her breath, her voice tight. "Can you not ruin my wedding, Dad?" That hit me harder than Eloise's glare, like a knife twisting in my gut. Ruin it? After everything I'd given her? I looked at them both, my wife, my daughter, and felt the years of silence boiling up inside me. Ruin it, I said, my voice rising, not yelling but strong, filling the space. This isn't a ruin. This is a reckoning. The truth's been waiting long enough, and I'm tired of carrying it alone. The room went still again, the chatter dying out, every eye back on me. I reached into the envelope one last time, my fingers closing around the final paper. I pulled it out slow, holding it up so they could see the bold print across the top. "This," I said, my voice steady as steel, "is a notice of separation. I'll be filing for divorce on Monday. Everything I own, my business, this estate, the cars, the cabin, it's all in my name. Not ours, Eloise. Mine." A gasp swept through the crowd, loud and sharp, like a wave crashing. Eloise's face went white, her hands dropping to her sides, and Clarissa let out a small sound, like a sob she couldn't hold back. I kept going, looking straight at Eloise. "You've spent years acting like I was nothing, like I was just here to serve you, to bankroll your life while you smiled for the cameras. Well, I'm done. This," I waved my hand around the hall at the flowers, the lights, the whole damn wedding. "This is the last thing I'll ever give you without gratitude. Without respect." The words felt good, like a weight lifting off my shoulders, but they hurt too, cutting deep as they came out. I turned to Clarissa, softening my voice just a little. "And you, kid, I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because I can't keep pretending I don't matter. You laughed tonight, went along with it, and maybe you didn't mean it to sting like it did. But it's time you saw me for real. I'm your father, not some shadow you can ignore." Her eyes were full of tears now, spilling over, but she didn't speak. Trevor reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, staring at me like she was lost. Eloise found her voice again, shrill and shaking. "You can't do this, Conrad. You can't just walk away and take everything." I looked at her, calm now, the anger settling into something colder, harder. "I can, and I will. I've got the papers, the receipts, the proof. You didn't want me in your life, not really. You wanted what I could give you. Now you'll see what it's like without it." The room was buzzing again, people whispering, some standing up, others craning their necks to see. I saw Maynard in the back, grinning like this was the best show he'd ever watched, and Trevor's parents huddled together, their faces tight with shock. I didn't care about any of them. This was between me and the two women who'd defined my life for 25 years. "I built this," I said, one last time, gesturing at the estate. "Not just the walls, but the life you've been living. And I'm taking it back, not out of spite, but because it's mine. Because I deserve something for me." I folded the papers, tucked them back into the envelope, and slipped it into my pocket. Eloise was shaking her head, muttering something I couldn't hear, her hands clenched into fists. Clarissa wiped her eyes, her voice small when she finally spoke. "Dad, please," but I shook my head. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said. "I'm doing it to save myself. You'll figure it out, Clarissa. You're smart. You always have been." I took a step back, then another, feeling the eyes on me, the weight of the moment. "Enjoy the rest of the night, I said, my voice quiet now, final. It's all paid for. My last gift. Then I turned and walked toward the door, not the emergency exit, but the main one, the big double doors that led out into the night. The sound of my shoes on the floor echoed, steady and sure, and nobody stopped me. I didn't look back. Not once. I walked out of the Rosebridge Estate reception hall, the double doors swinging shut behind me with a soft thud, and the night air hit me like a cold slap. My name's Conrad Hale, and I just turned my life upside down, told Eloise I was filing for divorce, showed Clarissa and everyone else the truth about what I'd built, and left them all staring after me. The silence followed me like a shadow as I crossed the gravel lot to my truck, my old gray suit jacket flapping in the breeze. Nobody chased me, no voices called out, and I didn't expect them to. I'd said what I needed to say, and now I was done. I climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar creak of the springs under me, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the dark, lighting up the road ahead, and I drove off, leaving the wedding, the lights, the whole mess behind me. I didn't go home, not to the house I'd shared with Eloise for 25 years, the one full of her furniture and her rules. Instead, I headed for the lakeside cabin I'd bought a few years back, a little place I'd fixed up myself when I needed to get away. It was an hour's drive, and I kept the radio off, just listening to the hum of the tires on the pavement, letting my thoughts settle. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt hollow, like I'd left something behind I couldn't name. When I got to the cabin, the moon was high, reflecting off the water in silver streaks. I parked, grabbed the duffel bag I'd packed that morning, just in case, and went inside. The place smelled like pine and dust, simple and quiet, nothing like the polished chaos of Rosebridge. I dropped the bag by the door, lit the old wood stove, and sat on the couch, a lumpy thing I'd found at a yard sale. For the first time in years, I slept without grinding my teeth, without that tight knot in my jaw I'd carried so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to let it go. The next morning, I made coffee on the stove, black and strong, and sat on the porch watching the lake ripple in the wind. My phone stayed off. I didn't want Eloise's calls, didn't want Clarissa's guilt, didn't want any of it. I'd spent decades tied to them, and now I was free, or at least starting to be. Over the next few weeks, I stayed at the cabin, working with my hands like I used to, fixing the dock, patching the roof, sanding down an old table I'd dragged out of the shed. It felt good, the ache in my muscles, the sweat on my back, like I was building something again, something just for me. I started calling up old friends, guys I hadn't seen in years because Eloise didn't like them, said they were too rough, too loud. There was Pete, who'd worked the warehouse with me back in the day, and Jimmy, who'd taught me how to fish when we were kids. We met up at a diner in town, the kind with sticky booths and coffee that tasted like tar, and they didn't ask about the wedding. They just slapped me on the back, handed me a beer, and talked about the old days, how we'd sneak out to the river with a six-pack, how Pete once fell in trying to impress a girl. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in I don't know how long. I drove to see my sister, Linda, too, out in the next county. She'd always hated Eloise, called her poison from the start, and when I told her what happened, she didn't say, "I told you so." She just hugged me, tight and quick, and made me a plate of her terrible meatloaf. "You're better off, Con," she said, her voice gruff but kind. Always were too good for her. I nodded, picking at the food, and felt a little lighter. Back at the cabin, I started sketching out plans, not for a house or a business, but for a life. I'd kept the estate, the company, all of it in my name, and the lawyer I called that first Monday said the divorce would be clean. Eloise wouldn't get much, not after I showed the papers proving what was mine. I didn't want revenge, though. I wanted peace. I fished off the dock some days, caught a few trout, cooked them over the fire. I read books I'd never had time for, old westerns and fishing guides, and let the days stretch out slow and quiet. The hollow in my chest started to fill, not with anger or regret, but with something new, myself, maybe, the guy I'd lost somewhere along the way. I didn't hear from Clarissa, not yet, and I didn't push. She'd reach out when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Either way, I'd done my part. I'd given her everything, and now I was giving myself something too. The cabin creaked at night, the wind whispering through the trees, and I slept deep, dreaming of nothing but the lake and the sky. A year had passed since I walked out of that wedding at Rosebridge Estate, and I was sitting on the porch of my lakeside cabin, the wood creaking under me as I sipped coffee from a chipped mug. My name's Conrad Hale, and I'd spent the last 12 months rebuilding. Not a house or a business, but me. The divorce went through quick, cleaner than I'd expected, with Eloise getting the house and not much else. Everything I'd built, the estate, the company, stayed mine. She'd moved to Nevada with her sister, last I heard, and I didn't care enough to check. Life at the cabin was simple now, quiet, the way I liked it. I'd fixed up the place good, new shingles, a sturdier dock, even a little garden out back where I grew tomatoes and peppers. I was out there one morning, checking the plants, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Clarissa. I hadn't heard from her since that night. Not a call, not a text. And I'd let her be, figuring she'd come around when she was ready, or maybe never. I answered, my voice rough from not talking much lately. "Hey kid," I said, and she was quiet for a second before she said, "Dad, can we meet? Just coffee or something." Her voice was small, different from the girl who'd told me not to ruin her wedding. I said yes, told her to pick a place, and an hour later I was sitting across from her in a diner near town, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and waitresses who called you hon. She looked tired, thinner than I remembered, her hair pulled back messy. She didn't have her wedding ring on, and I didn't ask about Trevor right away. We ordered coffee, black for me, some sugary thing for her, and sat there, the silence heavy between us. "I'm sorry," she said finally, staring at her cup. "I didn't know, Dad. About the estate, the trust fund, any of it. I didn't see it." Her voice broke a little, and I nodded, slow, letting her talk. "You weren't meant to," I said, keeping it simple. "I made it easy to forget me. That's on me too." She looked up then, her eyes wet but not crying yet. "Mom's gone," she said. "She's in Nevada. And Trevor, we split up a few months ago. It didn't work." I didn't say anything, just waited, and she kept going. "I messed up that night. I should have stopped it, the MC, all of it. I didn't know what you'd done for me for us." I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. "It's done, Clarissa. We can't undo it. But we can start over, if you want." She nodded, quick, like she'd been hoping I'd say that. And we talked, really talked, for the first time in years. Not about the wedding or the money, but about little things. The diner's pie, the weather, how she'd started a new job teaching kids art. It was careful, slow, but it was something. After that, she started coming to the cabin every month or so. She'd show up with a bag of groceries, sometimes just herself, and we'd sit by the lake, not saying much at first. Then one day, she brought a little girl with her, my granddaughter, Lily, 3 years old, with Clarissa's eyes and a shy smile. I didn't know about her before that. Didn't know Clarissa had kept her from Trevor's side quiet during the wedding mess. "This is your grandpa," Clarissa told her, and Lily hid behind her leg, peeking out at me. I knelt down, held out a hand, and she took it after a minute, her fingers tiny in mine. We started building something, the three of us, time, not stuff. I'd take Lily down to the dock, show her how to skip rocks, her little laughs bouncing across the water. Clarissa would watch, smiling sometimes, and I could see her letting go of whatever she'd carried from that night. One afternoon, we were inside, the rain tapping on the roof, and Lily was tugging at my sleeve, asking for a snack. Clarissa looked at me, her face softer than it had been in years, and said, "Dad, can you teach her how to fold napkins? The fancy way, like you used to." I froze for a second, remembering that morning before the wedding, the stack of napkins I'd made for her big day, the ones nobody noticed. Then I smiled, real and warm. "Yeah," I said, grabbing a napkin from the drawer. "I think I can." I sat Lily on my lap, showed her how to fold the corners, her small hands fumbling, but trying. Clarissa watched, leaning against the counter, and for the first time, I felt like we were a family again, not the one I'd lost, but a new one, built on truth and time. The rain kept falling, and I kept folding, knowing this was enough.
When I think about my life, I always believed I was living the dream, or at least my version of it. I married Emily 10 years ago, a woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. She had this effortless charm, the kind that made you feel lucky just to stand beside her. Together, we built what I thought was an unshakable foundation, a marriage full of love, trust, and respect. We weren't flashy people, but we had the kind of life that made others envy us. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Our two kids, Zoe and Ethan, are my pride and joy. Zoe with her endless curiosity and love for drawing, and Ethan, who could spend hours building elaborate Lego castles, made every day worth it. Dinner at the table, Saturday morning soccer games, movie nights with popcorn. It was the kind of routine that felt comforting, like a warm blanket on a cold day. Emily and I were a team. She kept the home running while I worked long hours at a job I didn't love but knew was necessary to provide for our family. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I believed we were happy. But looking back now, I see the cracks that were there all along. The small things you overlook because you don't want to believe there's something wrong. It started subtly, as these things often do. Emily had always been sociable, the type to strike up a conversation with anyone. She'd laugh at my quiet, analytical nature, saying I needed to loosen up. "Not everyone is trying to solve a puzzle, Michael," she'd tease. I loved that about her. She was the spark, and I was the steady hand. We balanced each other. Then, slowly, the spark started feeling distant. At first, I thought it was just life catching up with us. We'd had our fair share of stresses, work deadlines, managing the kids' schedules, the occasional disagreement about money. Everyone has their moments, right? But there were these little changes in Emily that I couldn't quite put my finger on. She'd stay on her phone longer than usual, scrolling with this faint smile on her face. When I'd ask, "What's so funny?" she'd shrug and say, "Just a meme from work. Harmless enough." And then there were the late nights. Emily, who used to be in bed by 10 sharp, started staying up late in the living room. She'd say she needed time to unwind or that she'd gotten sucked into some show on Netflix. I didn't question it at first. After all, I was exhausted most nights myself, and honestly, who was I to say she couldn't have some time alone? But as the nights grew more frequent, I began to feel something. A quiet unease I couldn't explain. Even her presence felt different. Have you ever stood next to someone you love but felt like they were miles away? That's how it was with Emily. We'd talk, but our conversations became surface level. Kids, groceries, schedules. The deep, meaningful chats we used to have were replaced by quick exchanges of logistics. "Did you pick up Zoe's art supplies?" Or, "Ethan has a soccer game at 4. I told myself it was normal, just a phase. After all, we were both busy, right? Love changes over time. It matures. It doesn't always have to be fireworks. But then there were the moments when I caught her looking at me differently. I don't know how to describe it except to say it felt like she wasn't really seeing me, like she was looking past me, through me. And every time I tried to address it, to ask if something was wrong, she'd smile, this tight, dismissive smile, and say, "I'm fine, Michael. You're overthinking again." And I believed her. Or at least I wanted to believe her. Because questioning her, questioning us, meant acknowledging the possibility that the life I thought we had wasn't as solid as I believed. It meant confronting fears I wasn't ready to face. So, I let it slide. I convinced myself it was all in my head, that the stress of work was making me paranoid. Emily was my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. She wouldn't lie to me. She couldn't. Looking back, I see now that those cracks in our perfect facade weren't just cracks. They were warning signs. Signs I ignored because I didn't want to believe what they were telling me. I had built my world around the idea that Emily and I were unshakable. That no matter what life threw at us, we'd face it together. It's funny, isn't it? How you can be so certain of something, so sure of its permanence, only to realize you were wrong all along. The truth? The truth was waiting just around the corner. And it was uglier than I ever could have imagined. You know that old saying, "Trust is like glass. Once it's broken, it's hard to fix"? I never really appreciated the depth of that until I started to see cracks in mine. Trust wasn't just broken in my marriage. It was splintering into tiny, jagged shards that I didn't even know how to hold without cutting myself. It started with small things, things you could dismiss if you really wanted to. And believe me, I wanted to. For instance, Emily used to tell me everything. She had this way of over-explaining her day, down to the tiniest detail. I'd hear about how Zoe spilled juice on her drawing, how Ethan wanted spaghetti for dinner, but only if there were no weird vegetables, and even how the woman at the checkout line couldn't stop talking about the weather. But lately, her stories were becoming shorter, vague, distant. I'd ask, "How was your day?" And she'd shrug and say, "Busy, as usual." No elaboration, no anecdotes, just that same flat response. At first, I thought, maybe she's just tired. Who isn't? But it didn't sit right with me. Then there was the phone. That damn phone. I know we all spend too much time on our screens these days, but Emily had taken it to another level. She was always holding it, always scrolling, always texting. The sound of notifications became like a background track to our life. And here's the kicker. She started turning the screen away whenever I walked into the room. I'd say something like, "What's got you so focused?" And she'd give me that smile. That tight, dismissive smile that felt more like a shield than an answer. "Just work stuff," she'd say. Or worse, "Nothing important." The first time I caught her laughing at her phone, I thought, well, good for her. She's having a moment of joy. But the second, third, fourth time, when she wouldn't share what was so funny, that's when the unease started to settle in my gut like a stone. I mean, I'm her husband. Why couldn't she just show me? And then there were the late nights. Emily had always been an early-to-bed kind of person. She used to say she couldn't function without her beauty sleep. But suddenly, she was staying up after I went to bed. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her on the couch, the glow of her phone lighting up her face. She'd look startled, almost guilty, like a kid caught sneaking candy. "What are you doing up?" I'd ask. "Just couldn't sleep," she'd reply. Just couldn't sleep. That became her go-to excuse. And maybe it would have been believable if it didn't happen so often. If she wasn't so quick to put her phone down the moment I walked into the room. If she didn't look at me with this mix of pity and irritation, like I was some clueless fool asking stupid questions. Still, I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. After all, she was still Emily, right? She still made breakfast for the kids, still laughed at Ethan's bad jokes, still gave me a kiss before I left for work. But those kisses, they felt different. Mechanical. Like she was checking a box on some invisible list. Kiss, husband. Smile. Move on. The moment I really started to doubt, though, was when she began working late. Emily didn't have a job that required late hours. She worked part-time from home, managing social media accounts for a couple of small businesses. It wasn't exactly a high-pressure corporate gig, but suddenly, she had client meetings that kept her out until 9-10 o'clock at night. One night I offered to pick her up. I thought it'd be a nice surprise. Maybe we could grab some ice cream on the way home like we used to. But when I called to let her know I was on my way, she sounded panicked. "Oh, no, that's okay. I'm already leaving. Don't worry about it." The tone in her voice wasn't relief. It was fear. And that fear? It planted something in me I couldn't ignore. I started noticing every little detail, like a detective piecing together a crime scene. The way she'd avoid eye contact when I asked about her day. The way her phone was always face down on the table. The way she'd hesitate before answering simple questions, as if she needed a second to figure out what lie to tell. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was certainty, growing stronger every day. I just didn't have proof. Not yet. And maybe, deep down, I didn't want proof. Because once you have proof, there's no going back. Once you know, you can't unknow. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Not yet. Not with everything at stake. But the cracks in our marriage? They weren't going away. They were only getting wider, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. The question wasn't if, it was when. It was a Tuesday night when the line between doubt and confirmation finally blurred. Tuesdays were always quiet in our house. The kids were in bed by 8:30, and Emily and I usually spent the evening in the living room, her reading or scrolling through her phone while I caught up on emails or sports highlights. It had become our routine, one of those silent rituals of married life where companionship doesn't always require words. But that night was different. Emily was glued to her phone again, but it wasn't just the usual scrolling. She was smiling. No, she was glowing. A kind of lightness radiated from her, the kind I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the smile she gave me when I cracked a bad joke or when the kids did something silly. It was private, like the kind of smile meant for someone else. And that someone wasn't me. I couldn't help myself. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to sound casual, even playful. She looked up, startled, her thumb freezing mid-scroll. "Oh, nothing," she said quickly, her tone a little too breezy. Then she put her phone face down on the couch beside her, the way she always did now, as if shielding its contents from prying eyes. My eyes. It was such a small thing, but it hit me hard. That phone had become her world, her confidant, her escape. And the way she guarded it, you'd think it held state secrets. I tried to let it go, to push the growing knot in my chest down where I couldn't feel it. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Later that night, as Emily slept soundly beside me, I found myself staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I'd told myself for weeks, months even, that I was imagining things, that I was overthinking, as she liked to say. But deep down, I knew. The truth was there, just out of reach, taunting me. And I had to know. I got out of bed and quietly reached for her phone on the nightstand. I wasn't proud of it. Spying on your spouse isn't exactly the foundation of a healthy marriage. But I felt like a drowning man grasping for a lifeline. I needed answers, no matter how ugly they might be. The screen lit up, and there it was. Nathan's name. Dozens of messages, their thread pinned to the top of her chat list like a badge of importance. My stomach dropped as I began to read. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow. You always make me laugh. No one gets me like you do. That dress you wore today? Wow." Each message felt like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of me. I scrolled further, my hands trembling. There were inside jokes I didn't understand, compliments I hadn't heard in years, and moments of intimacy that didn't belong to me anymore. It wasn't explicit. There were no confessions of love or inappropriate pictures, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't just a friendship. This was a connection, a bond, an emotional intimacy she had no right to share with someone else. I sat there staring at the screen, my mind spinning. How long had this been going on? Was it just words, or had it crossed into something more? I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. What I did know was that I was no longer the person she turned to when she needed to laugh, to vent, to feel understood. Nathan had taken that place. The next morning, I confronted her. I couldn't keep it in any longer. "Emily," I said, holding up her phone, "do you want to tell me what this is?" Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and anger flashing across her face. "You went through my phone?" she snapped, snatching it from my hand. "How dare you invade my privacy?" "That's what you're upset about?" I shot back. "Not the fact that you're sharing intimate conversations with another man?" She tried to brush it off. "It's not what you think. Nathan is just a friend. We talk, we joke, that's all." "Just a friend?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you send all your friends messages about how much you can't wait to see them? About how no one gets you like they do?" Her face turned red, and for a moment, she didn't respond. Then she said the words that would haunt me for days. "You don't understand, Michael. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who listens. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just about Nathan. It was about us, or rather, the version of us that had slowly eroded over time. She felt something was missing, and instead of working with me to fix it, she'd found someone else to fill the void, someone who wasn't her husband. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers. But instead, I walked away. Not because I was calm, but because I was scared. Scared of what I might say. Scared of what she might admit. Scared that our perfect facade was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I thought I had seen the worst of it, the lies, the texts, the late nights. But I hadn't. Not by a long shot. If there's one thing I'll never forget, it's that day at the park. The day everything came crashing down in the most humiliating, infuriating, and gut-wrenching way possible. It was supposed to be a simple family outing. Just me, Emily, and the kids. Zoe had been begging to try out her new kite, and Ethan wanted to show off his soccer skills. I thought it would be a good chance to reconnect, to remind Emily of what we had, what we'd built together. I had this naive hope that maybe, just maybe, we could salvage what was left of us. We packed a picnic, loaded up the car, and headed to the park. The kids were thrilled, running ahead to the open field while Emily and I set up on a blanket under a tree. She seemed distracted, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. I bit my tongue, determined not to let my frustration ruin the day. For the kids' sake, I told myself. Always for the kids. I should have known something was off when Emily kept glancing around like she was expecting someone. But I didn't want to make a scene. Not here, not now. So I stayed quiet, even as my gut churned with unease. And then, as if summoned by some invisible force, he showed up. Nathan, strolling across the park like he owned the place, his smug grin plastered across his face. My heart sank as I watched Emily's eyes light up, a reaction she hadn't given me in years. She stood up as he approached, her body language shifting in a way that made my blood boil. She wasn't just happy to see him. She was excited. "Hey!" Nathan called out, his voice loud enough to draw attention. He greeted Zoe and Ethan like they were old friends, ruffling Ethan's hair and complimenting Zoe's kite. My kids, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, giggled and chatted with him like he was some kind of hero. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my tone sharp. Nathan didn't miss a beat. "Emily mentioned you'd be here. Thought I'd stop by and say hi." Emily looked flustered, but she didn't deny it. She didn't even meet my eyes. I felt the last shred of my patience snap. "This is a family outing," I said, my voice low and steady, though my hands were trembling. "You're not part of this family." Nathan raised his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa, easy there. Just being friendly." Friendly. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Friendly didn't explain the late-night texts, the secret meetings, the way my wife seemed to orbit around him like a planet caught in his gravitational pull. Then it happened. The moment that turned my simmering anger into a full-blown eruption. Nathan turned to Emily, completely ignoring me, and said, "You're looking stunning today, as always." And before I could process what was happening, he leaned in, right in front of the kids, like he was about to kiss her. "Don't you dare," I growled, but it was too late. His lips brushed her cheek, and something inside me snapped. I didn't think. I just reacted. My fist connected with his jaw before I even realized I'd moved. The sound of the impact was sickening, a dull crack that echoed in the air. Nathan stumbled back, clutching his face, and for a moment, there was silence. Then chaos. Emily screamed, grabbing my arm and shouting, "What are you doing, Michael?" The kids stared in shock, their kite and soccer ball forgotten. Nathan straightened, his face twisted in pain and anger, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You're insane," He spat, his words slurred. "I'm calling the cops." "Call whoever you want," I shot back, my voice shaking with rage. "But stay the hell away from my wife and my kids." Emily's expression was a mix of fury and panic. "You've embarrassed all of us," she hissed, her eyes darting around at the growing crowd of onlookers. People were recording, whispering, pointing. My family outing had turned into a public spectacle, and I felt the weight of every single pair of eyes on me. But I didn't care. Not in that moment. All I could think about was how Nathan had crossed the line, how Emily had let him, and how my kids had to witness the fallout. My fists were still clenched, my breathing ragged, as I watched Nathan stumble away, muttering threats under his breath. Emily turned to me, her face pale with anger. "You've ruined everything," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything." I wanted to yell back, to tell her that she was the one who had ruined us. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, watching as she gathered the kids and walked away, leaving me alone in the middle of the park, surrounded by strangers who didn't know the half of it. In that moment, I realized something. No matter how much I loved her, no matter how much I wanted to fix things, we had crossed a line we could never come back from. And it wasn't just Nathan's jaw that had broken that day. It was the last fragile thread of our marriage. I wish I could tell you that the fight at the park ended it, that it brought clarity, that it forced Emily to realize what was at stake. I wish I could say we went home, had one of those dramatic conversations you see in movies, and figured out where to go from there. But life isn't a movie, and what followed was nothing short of a slow, excruciating unraveling. The police showed up about an hour after the incident. I was still sitting on the park bench, staring at the ground, replaying the punch in my mind like it was on an endless loop. The sound of Nathan's jaw cracking, the crowd gasping, Emily screaming. Every detail was burned into my memory. "Sir, we need to talk," one of the officers said, pulling me out of my thoughts. Emily had called them. Or maybe Nathan did. I didn't even care at that point. They asked me questions, took statements, and gave me a long lecture about public altercations. Nathan, of course, played the victim, holding an ice pack to his jaw and milking the attention for all it was worth. "He attacked me unprovoked," he said, his words slurred. Unprovoked. The audacity of that man. They didn't arrest me. Not right then, at least. But I could tell it wasn't over. Nathan made it clear he planned to press charges, and Emily's silence during the whole ordeal spoke louder than any words ever could. She didn't defend me. She didn't say a single thing to explain why I'd done what I did. She just stood there, holding the kids, looking at me like I was a stranger. The drive home was the quietest it had ever been. Zoe and Ethan sat in the back seat, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously between me and Emily. I wanted to say something to them, to tell them that everything was going to be okay, but how could I? I didn't even believe it myself. When we got home, Emily finally broke the silence. "What were you thinking, Michael?" she hissed the moment the kids were out of earshot. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "What I've done?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Are you kidding me right now? Did you even see what he tried to do? He had no business being there, Emily, and he had no right." I stopped myself, my fists clenching as the memory of Nathan leaning in to kiss her flashed through my mind. I wasn't going to stand there and let him disrespect me. Disrespect us. Disrespect us, she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You think you're the victim here? You just humiliated me, Michael, in front of everyone. You made a scene, and now the kids—" Her voice cracked, and for a moment I thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just shook her head, her expression hardening. "You've ruined everything. Ruined everything." That was the moment I realized she wasn't upset about Nathan. She wasn't angry at him for crossing the line, or even at herself for letting it happen. She was angry at me. Because in her mind, I was the problem. Not her behavior, not the late nights, or the texts, or the lies. Just me. The kids, of course, were the collateral damage. Zoe wouldn't look at me for the rest of the night, and Ethan asked me if I was going to jail. "No, buddy," I told him, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "I'm not going anywhere." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure they were true. The next few days were a blur. Nathan, true to his word, filed a police report. I got a call from the station asking me to come in for questioning. I spent hours in a cramped room, explaining my side of the story to a detective who looked like he'd heard it all before. "Domestic disputes are messy," he said, barely looking up from his notepad. "But throwing punches in public isn't the answer." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that this wasn't just some petty argument, that Nathan had crossed a line no man should ever cross. But what was the point? The law didn't care about pride or respect or betrayal. All they saw was a man who threw a punch and another man with a broken jaw. At home, things were no better. Emily and I barely spoke. When we did, it was tense and clipped, like two people forced to share the same space but desperate to be anywhere else. She refused to talk about Nathan, about the texts, about what had happened at the park. "You can't keep blaming him for everything," she said at one point, her voice cold. "You need to take a hard look at yourself, Michael." Take a hard look at myself. That was rich, coming from her. But as much as I wanted to fire back, to tell her exactly what I thought of her and her so-called friend, I couldn't do it. Not with Zoe and Ethan upstairs, their world already fragile enough. So I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet and waited for the storm to pass. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't a storm you could wait out. This was the kind of storm that left nothing but wreckage in its wake. And I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I always thought I had a high tolerance for pain, not the physical kind, but the emotional kind. Life throws its punches, and you learn to roll with them. I thought that was what I was doing, enduring everything for the sake of my marriage, my family, and the life we'd built. But there's a limit to how much anyone can take, and that limit has a way of sneaking up on you. For me, it came in the quiet hours after the park incident, when the chaos settled but the damage remained. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the events of the past few days replaying in my mind like a broken record. Emily's words echoed louder than anything else. "You've ruined everything." It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Like I was the villain in this story. Like I was the one who had betrayed her trust and not the other way around. I tried to convince myself that her anger was just deflection, a way to avoid owning up to her mistakes. But a part of me couldn't shake the possibility that maybe she really believed it. Maybe in her mind, I was the problem. Maybe she'd been telling herself that for a long time, slowly rewriting the narrative of our marriage until I was the bad guy who drove her into someone else's arms. The worst part was that she didn't even seem sorry. Sure, she'd said she never meant for things to get out of hand, but those weren't words of remorse. They were words of inconvenience. She wasn't upset that she'd hurt me. She was upset that I'd exposed the cracks she was trying so hard to keep hidden. Every conversation we had felt like walking through a minefield. I'd try to bring up the texts, the late nights, Nathan's inappropriate behavior, but she'd shut it down every time. "We've talked about this, Michael," she'd say, exasperated. "How many times do I have to tell you? There's nothing going on." Nothing going on. I couldn't count how many times I'd heard that phrase. It had become her mantra, a shield to deflect every question, every accusation, every plea for honesty. And every time she said it, it chipped away at what little trust I had left. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but firm, "we need to talk, really talk. No excuses, no deflecting. I need answers." She sighed, not even looking up from her laptop. "I don't know what you want me to say, Michael. We've been over this." "I want the truth," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. I want to know why you think it's okay to prioritize someone else over your own family. I want to know why you let him into our lives. Why you let him... I stopped myself, my throat tightening. Why you let him treat you like his wife instead of mine. That got her attention. She closed the laptop and looked at me, her expression unreadable. I needed someone to talk to, she said after a long pause. Someone who listens. Someone who doesn't just go through the motions. Go through the motions? I repeated, my voice rising. Do you have any idea what I've been going through? Do you know how hard I've been trying to hold this family together while you... I stopped, shaking my head. No, of course you don't, because you've been too busy hiding behind Nathan to notice. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might fight back, throw my words back at me. But instead, she just shook her head. You don't get it, she said quietly. You never have. And that was it. The moment I realized we weren't just fighting about Nathan or the texts or the park incident. We were fighting about something deeper, something that had been festering for years. We were fighting about a marriage that had lost its foundation, about two people who had drifted so far apart they no longer recognized each other. I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me, suffocating me. The betrayal, the lies, the constant gaslighting. It was too much. I couldn't keep pretending that this was just a rough patch we could work through. I couldn't keep sacrificing my dignity for the sake of a marriage that was already broken. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, the distance between us felt like a chasm. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding, and for the first time, I let myself consider the possibility that maybe this was the end. Maybe love wasn't enough to fix what had been shattered. Maybe it was time to stop fighting for something that no longer existed. You know that moment when someone offers an apology, and instead of feeling relief, you feel insulted? Like they're throwing a bucket of water on a house that's already burned to the ground. That's what it felt like when Emily finally decided to apologize. If you could even call it that. It happened about a week after the park incident. By then, the silence between us had become unbearable. We weren't just avoiding conversations. We were avoiding each other entirely. Passing each other in the hallway like strangers, barely saying more than a word at a time. The kids noticed, of course. Zoe asked me why Mommy and Daddy weren't talking. Ethan just looked at me with those big, worried eyes that made me feel like the worst father in the world. I'd been sitting in the living room that evening, flipping through TV channels without really watching anything when Emily walked in. She stood there for a moment, like she was trying to decide whether to speak or leave. Finally, she sat down on the far end of the couch, as far away from me as she could without being in another room. I've been thinking, she started, her voice quiet, about everything. I didn't say anything. I just waited, unsure if I even wanted to hear what she had to say. I'm sorry, she said after a long pause. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I didn't mean to hurt you. It took me a moment to respond. Didn't mean to hurt me? I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. Emily, you didn't just hurt me. You betrayed me. You lied to me. You invited another man into our lives, into our kids' lives, and you're sitting here telling me you didn't mean for things to get bad? She flinched, but her expression hardened. You don't understand, Michael. It wasn't like that. Then explain it to me, I snapped. Tell me what it was like, because from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like you prioritized Nathan over our marriage, over our family. She sighed, shaking her head. It wasn't about Nathan. It was about everything else. You and me, the way things have been for years. I needed someone to talk to, someone who made me feel seen. Seen? I repeated, my stomach twisting. You're telling me you turned to him because I didn't make you feel seen? Do you have any idea what it's been like for me? Watching you pull away, watching you lie to my face, watching you let another man step into a role that was supposed to be mine? Emily's gaze dropped to her lap. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said again. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered all the times I'd tried to reach out to her, to talk to her, to fix things before they got this bad. And every single time she'd shut me down, deflected, lied. And now she wanted to blame me for not seeing her, for not trying hard enough. I'm done, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. I'm done trying to fix something you clearly didn't care enough to fight for. You say you're sorry, but you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry things got messy. But you're not sorry for betraying me. You're not sorry for letting Nathan into our lives. That's not fair, she said, her voice trembling. You're not perfect, Michael. You've made mistakes too. Maybe I have, I said, but I didn't invite someone else into our marriage. I didn't lie to your face. I didn't put our kids in the middle of this mess. She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the floor, while the weight of everything we weren't saying hung in the air between us. After a while, she stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me alone on the couch. And that was it. Her big attempt at reconciliation. A half-hearted apology that felt more like an excuse than a genuine acknowledgement of what she'd done. No promises to change, no effort to rebuild what was broken. Just an admission that she didn't mean for things to get bad. I sat there for a long time after she left, thinking about all the years we'd spent together, all the memories we'd built, all the plans we'd made for the future. And for the first time, I realized that none of it mattered anymore. Because a marriage without trust, without honesty, without respect, it's not a marriage. It's just two people living in the same house, pretending everything's fine when it's anything but. And I couldn't pretend anymore. The moment I decided to leave wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting match, no grand confrontation. It was quiet, eerily so. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at my untouched cup of coffee, listening to the sound of Emily moving around upstairs. She was getting ready for the day, humming softly to herself like nothing had changed, like we weren't living in the ruins of a marriage that once meant everything to me. I had spent weeks trying to hold on, trying to convince myself that we could somehow fix this. But every effort, every conversation, every fleeting moment of hope had been met with a wall. A wall built of deflection, denial, and half-hearted apologies. Emily didn't see the cracks in our marriage the way I did. Or maybe she saw them and just didn't care enough to do anything about them. The kids were my only anchor. Zoe and Ethan didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to grow up in a home filled with tension, where their parents barely spoke to each other and their father walked on eggshells every day. I realized that staying wasn't saving them. It was hurting them. They deserved better, even if that meant their parents weren't together anymore. So I made the decision. I packed a bag, just enough to get me through a few days, and left it by the door. When Emily came downstairs and saw it, her expression didn't register shock. It was more like resignation, as if she'd known this was coming all along. "You're leaving," she said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. "I am," I replied. My voice was calm, but inside I was anything but. "I can't do this anymore, Emily. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But this, whatever this is, it's not a marriage. It's not something I can live with." She didn't argue. She didn't beg me to stay. She just nodded, her eyes darting to the bag like it was some kind of confirmation. "What about the kids?" she asked quietly. "I'll come back to see them," I said. "I'm not abandoning them, Emily. I'm leaving because I love them, because I can't be the father they need while I'm stuck in this mess." She didn't respond. And that silence, that cold, empty silence, was all the confirmation I needed. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of us as anything more than two people co-parenting from a distance. The first night alone was the hardest. I found a small motel on the edge of town, the kind of place you only stay in when you're desperate. The room was cramped, the bed uncomfortable, and the air conditioning rattled all night. But for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. No tension, no arguments, no unspoken resentment hanging in the air. Just me and my thoughts. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics. Finding a place to live, sorting out custody arrangements, trying to explain the situation to Zoe and Ethan without breaking their hearts. I hated seeing the confusion in their eyes, hearing Zoe ask why I couldn't just fix it and make everything go back to normal. Ethan, always quieter, just hugged me and said, "I love you, Daddy." Those words nearly broke me, but I kept going. I found a small apartment not far from the kids' school, close enough to stay involved in their lives. I threw myself into my work, not because I loved it, but because it was a distraction. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy. The loneliness was crushing at times. I missed the kids more than I thought possible, and even though I knew leaving was the right decision, I couldn't help but feel like I'd failed. Like I hadn't done enough to save my family. But then I'd remind myself, staying would have been the real failure. Staying would have meant sacrificing my dignity, my sanity, and the chance for a better future. For me, and for my kids. The first time I truly felt like I could breathe again was during one of my weekends with Zoe and Ethan. We were at the park. Ironically, the same park where everything had fallen apart. But this time, there was no tension, no unwanted visitors, no simmering anger threatening to boil over. Just me and my kids, laughing, playing, and enjoying the kind of simple, honest joy I'd almost forgotten was possible. Zoe looked up at me at one point, her face flushed from running around. "You seem happy, Daddy," she said. Like, really happy. And for the first time in a long time, I realized she was right. I was happy. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, but because I was finally free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, the endless cycle of trying to fix something that was beyond repair. Emily and I still spoke, of course. We had to, for the kids' sake. But our conversations were brief, transactional, and devoid of the emotional weight they used to carry. I didn't hate her. Not anymore. I pitied her in a way. Pity for what she'd lost, for what she'd thrown away. But I didn't dwell on it. That part of my life was over. And as I watched Zoe and Ethan chase each other around the park, their laughter filling the air, I realized something else. Endings aren't always bad. Sometimes they're necessary. Sometimes they're the only way to find a new beginning.